Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the February 16th legislative session of the Wycomico County Council. If you would at this time, make sure your phones are turned off, and I would like to call the meeting to order, and if you would like to join us with the opening prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And forgive us our trespasses. Trespasses, as we forgive them who trespass against us. But deliver us from evil. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Hurley, would you please read the items on the consent agenda?
Good morning, Mr. President, council members, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin this morning, we have one change to the agenda, and that is work session number 6 on the discussion of the proposed charter provisions for discussion with the Charter Review Committee will be the first work session this afternoon or later this morning. And then the remaining work session items would just be renumbered. We have 5 items on the consent agenda. That is legislative minutes from February the 2nd, 2020, open work session minutes from January the 5th, 2021, on the letter of support for a proposed Horizon program, open work session minutes from January the 5th, 2021, discussion on invasive species management, open work session minutes from the January 5th, 2021 on the letter of support for proposed changes to Class B beer, wine, and liquor golf course license, and open work session minutes from January the 5th, 2021 on the forest conservation easement 133 Paddock Drive, Fruitland, Maryland. And Mr. President, we are still cross-training in the office this morning, so with your permission, I'll have Mrs. Lynn Sandy read the remaining agenda items.
Absolutely. Need a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Got a motion by Mr. McCain. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. It's unanimous. Ms. Sandy.
Okay, good morning. The first item on the agenda is a public hearing on resolution number 17, 2021, which is to approve the relocation of a portion of a forest conservation easement containing .08 acres, more or less, located at 133 Paddock Drive, Lot 29, Fruitland, Maryland. A public hearing notice was published in the Daily Times and posted on the county's website stating that a public hearing would be held this morning at 10 a.m. Council held a work session on this request on January 5th, 2021, and Mr. Tyler Walston with the Department of Planning, Zoning, and Community Development is here to answer any questions.
Right, this time we're going to open the floor to the public hearing. If there's anyone commenting on this part of the public hearing, please state your name and county of residence. Do we have any comments? Any comments? Mr. Tyler, do you have anything? I don't have anything. Okay. Need a motion to approve resolution number 17-2021.
So moved. Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of resolution number 17-2021, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Resolution number 17-2021 passed unanimously. Ms. Sandy?
Okay, the next item is a public hearing on resolution number 18, 2021, approving an amendment to the capital improvement program to modify the funding source for the Taxiway G program from general obligation bonds to pay-go funding. A public hearing notice was published with the Daily Times and posted on the county's website stating that a public hearing would be held this morning at 10 a.m. Council held a work session on this request on February 2nd, 2021, and Mrs. Pam Olin, Director of Finance, is here to answer any questions.
Right at this time, we're going to open the floor to the public hearing for resolution number 18-2021. Any public comments, please state your name and county of residence. Do we have any public comments on resolution number 18-2021? Any comments? All right, this time we're going to close the floor to public comments on this. Need a motion to approve resolution number 18-2021.
So moved.
Got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of resolution number 18-2021, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Resolution number 18-2021 passed unanimously. Ms. Sandy?
Okay, the next item is Resolution Number 19, 2021, approving a contingency transfer in the amount of $200,000 for the airport water main extension project. And Mrs. Pam Oland, Director of Finance, is here if there are any questions.
Okay, need a motion to approve resolution number 19-2021.
So moved.
Got a motion by Mr. McCain. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor of resolution number 19-2021, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Resolution number 19-2021 passed unanimously. Ms. Sandy?
Next is Resolution Number 20, 2021, approving a zoning classification of highway regional commercial upon annexation by the town of Del Mar of property located on the south side of East Line Road containing approximately 6.226 acres and is contiguous to the existing corporate limits of the town of Del Mar. And we have Mr. Bob Benson here if there's any questions.
Right, need a motion to approve resolution number 20-21.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor of resolution number 20-2021, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Resolution number 20-2021 passed unanimously. Ms. Sandy?
All right, the next item is Resolution Number 21, 2021, approving the appointment of Mr. Edward S. Werkheiser as Deputy Director of the Wycomico County Department of Emergency Services.
Right, need a motion to approve resolution number 21-2021. Got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor of resolution number 21-2021, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Chair votes aye. Resolution number 21-2021 passes unanimously. And we do have Mr. Werkheiser in the audience if he would like to come up and introduce himself real quick. Mr. Shipley, you can join him. Welcome aboard, Mr. Werkheiser.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to thank you all for the full support on the resolution and put me in this position. I look forward to the opportunity to help develop and work programs here within the county. Feel like it's going to be a good experience for all of us involved. So just look forward to it and thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from Mr. Werkheiser?
Just welcome aboard.
Well, thank you.
Ms.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, welcome aboard. We look
All right,
forward to
thank
working
you.
with you. And thank you for attending.
Thanks.
Ms. Sandy?
That is all we have. this
Okay.
morning.
This time, we're going to open the floor to public comments. Please limit all public comments to 3 minutes or less, and any presented material may be presented or submitted to the council members. If you do so, please include 10 copies. We won't tolerate any derogatory remarks or personal attacks, obscene language, and disruptive behavior such as shouting, stomping feet, and booing. It won't be permitted. This has happened in the past, so it was addressed a couple weeks ago, and unfortunately, we had to make this statement. So if there's any public comments, please go to the podium.
I'll try to be calm. My name is John Palmer, Wycomico citizen. Live at Star Road in Del Mar, Delaware. Can you hear me okay?
A little bit. Pull your mask down. And we asked you to pull your mask down because we've had a couple people from the audience stating that they can't understand with the mask on, and some of them are disabled, and they want the opportunity to read your lips.
Well, good, because I'm up here today. I did an article this weekend on SBY News, and I put down a bill number, a Senate bill, and that number was the wrong bill. So one of my two purposes to come here today was to ensure that everybody knows what the correct bill is, and that's on the enabling legislation that's up in Annapolis right now. In the Senate, that bill is 794. It's currently in the Senate and Budget Taxation Committee, and the chair is Senator, now I'm not sure about the pronunciation of his name. It looks like Guzone or Guzoni. It's Guzzone, and he's the chair, and that bill will be heard on the 24th of February. The House bill is HB 1179, and it is chaired by Delegate Ann Kaiser, and it's in the House Ways and Means Committee, and it'll be heard on the 2nd of March. Now, you can attend these meetings by Zoom to testify, and you have to sign up before time, or you can go ahead and submit written documentation. But you have to have the written documentation 2 days before the committee hears the bill. And in order to do that, if you go to the website of the Maryland General Assembly, at the very top right-hand part of the page, you'll see 3 or 4 little blocks that'll say Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, where there's one that says My MGA. And if you click on that one, it'll give you all the prompts to where you have to log into an account, and once you get logged into the account, you can submit your comments. So those are the 2 bills on the enabling legislation that this county council has submitted, and I hope everybody gets the opportunity to testify. The second reason why I'm here, I've often heard members of the council and the public say the best way to grow revenues in this county is to grow our base. And I agree with that 100%. We grow our base, we grow our revenues. What I'm confused about, if that's the way we get revenues, why are we waiving this property tax revenue in the form of a property tax credit? It appears that this group that has started and who wants this enabling legislation has run through their startup money. I understand it to be close to $4 million, and now they're looking for some new investors and new funding. And I just hope the taxpayers are not going to be the one that's going to be contributing to that fund. This is a great deal for investors. In fact, if I had $50K laying around, I'd put one in the way it's written up to get 15% back on that. That's pretty darn good. But I don't think this is a good deal for the county financially. So I just don't support it. Mr. Soda, if you're watching this down the hall in your office, I invite you to come up here at the People's Podium next meeting, and just give us some maybe a reason why you didn't support this in the beginning, and then suddenly you do support it. And I would surely like to hear you get up here and tell everybody what's all the good reasoning that you have to support this enabling legislation. And we have 4 experts on the council on this, Mr. McCain and Mr. Davis and Mr. Hastings, Mr. Cannon. You all push for this real big, but I still haven't heard any really good reasons why.
Mr. Palmer, can we limit the names?
Huh?
Can we limit calling out names?
Oh, okay. All right, I guess everybody knows who supports this and who doesn't. So you know, it just needs to be explained a little bit better to the people so that we know what we're getting into. And I appreciate the opportunity to come up here to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Do we have any more public comments? Any more public comments? All right, moving to council comments. Do we have any council comments?
Any comment?
Mr. Cannon.
Yeah, Mr. Palmer, you and I should have lunch sometime. You have my cell number, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, can you give me a call? Because I'd love to have lunch with you and explain it to you. Okay?
Council comments anymore? Ms. Ackley?
Yes, I had the opportunity to speak with the county executive, Mr. Pasota, this week, and he is entertaining further discussion on the Women's Commission. I've had several female leaders reach out to me in the past month wanting to revive this commission, so I think this is a good way of moving forward. Thank you.
Any more council comments?
Yep, I've got
Mr. McCain?
a couple comments. Just want to get a message out there to the community that the Community Emergency Homeless Shelter Project, they provide homeless shelter at the Langler Building over here on North Division Street through the months of January, February, and March. They need help with the overnight shifts for the men. They desperately need some help there. Those shifts are from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So usually there's 2 people. So I just would ask people in the community to get a friend, volunteer if you go online. It's really simple. They've got a sign-up sheet. You just sign up and show up, and they'll tell you what you need to do. So, but they really need some help. Also, I know we're getting a lot of letters regarding the DAF tank out on Porter Mill Road. And I know we've talked about this before. There was some pending litigation. I don't know if that litigation still is pending, because I know we don't have this on our agenda. So if nothing else, maybe we need to get on the agenda at the next session to at least get educated or updated on, what we can do as far as discussions, and if that litigation's still ongoing, and if it is, what's the status of it? It's holding us up from being able to deal with this issue. So, we don't want to get in a situation where we've done 2 moratoriums now. We're into the second one. So,
Well, at the agenda meeting that Ms. Hurley and I had, I asked her to reach out to Mr. Pasota to see if we can get this moving.
good. And one last comment would like to make, and actually I want to give a big thank you to Laura Hurley. We're going to discuss later in our meeting today the appointment for the Charter Review Commission. I think we've had, I'm not even sure what the last count is. I think it's well over 40
Yes.
applicants, so which is a great response from the community. It's a 15-person commission, so it's been a lot of work on her part to assemble for us those letters of interest and resumes, and the deadline was yesterday, so we were getting applications right up until the end of the day yesterday. So, and it was supposed to be her day off. So instead of being her day off, she's sending us, last minute list and keeping up with this. So, the work that Ms. Hurley does for us, along with Ms. Sandy, is, beyond the call of duty a lot of times. So I just want to give a big thank you for doing that for us.
Thank you, Mr. McCain. Do we have any more council comments? Okay, I too was going to thank Ms. Hurley because yesterday was a state holiday, and we happened to make the deadline the 15th, so she had to watch her emails and text messages and put together the list of the applicants. And I want to thank the applicants. There were 45 people that expressed interest in serving on the Charter Review Committee, and we'll be discussing this later, so thank you very much on that. All right, I need a motion and a second to adjourn from legislative session to go into open work sessions, followed by a closed work session pursuant to the general provisions article, section 3-305, B, 1, and 9 as follows. 1, to discuss a personnel matter relating to the evaluation of an individual over whom this public body has jurisdiction, which will be held in closed session to protect the confidentiality of the individual. And 2, to conduct collective bargaining negotiations or consider matters that relate to the negotiations, which will be held in closed session to protect the collective bargaining strategy. And 3, an administrative session to give the council administrator direction pursuant to section 3-104 of the general provisions article. Need a motion?
So moved.
Got a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, move to open work session. This time we have a lease agreement. No, we're moving up to proposed charter provisions for the discussion of the Charter Review Committee. Mr. Taylor, can you start this discussion?
Yes. Let me just backtrack just for a second on the council comment regarding the DAF tank litigation. My understanding is that litigation is still ongoing. Excuse me. I don't think that the litigation would really, certainly not directly affect any changes that would be made in the zoning code. So I don't know that there's any particular reason to hold up because of the litigation. Because mostly the change in the code is going to be going forward, not backwards. The other point, just personal, as soon as I get through here, because of another appointment that's important, I'm going to leave. Regarding the charter amendments, I wasn't aware until Saturday morning from an email I got Friday afternoon, but didn't see until then, that there was going to be any discussion of them today. I thought it was going to be at the next meeting in March. I've not had a chance to go. There's 31 items. Some of them, of course, are pretty much cut and dried. Others are not. Some of them are pretty involved. And in my opinion, warrant looking at the charters from other counties just to see how other people do things. And that takes a lot of time, believe me, and particularly to put it into a convenient form to look at, either the council or later on the Charter Review Committee. I've done that in 4 or 5 instances. I think I sent 4 of them to Laura. I don't know if they've been sent on. We can certainly, I don't think it is not imperative to decide those points today, or even to decide how the council wants to proceed in evaluating these 31 items. But we can get started, that's for sure. Before looking at any of the specific ones that I've looked at in detail, there was one one item on the list that frankly I didn't quite understand what it was for, and it happened to be number 29, censorship of council members. Now, I think, and I talked to Ms. Hurley a little bit this morning about this, I don't know whether that means censor, like you can't say something, and if you do, there are going to be penalties. I mean, that's censoring. Or censure, C-E-N-S-U-R-E, which is saying, smack you on the wrist because we didn't like what you did. So I don't know what the difference is there, and I don't know how to approach it until I know exactly, does it mean this or does it mean that? Because they're different items.
Does any council member want to comment on that?
Bob,
Mr.
I think it would be, from my perspective, I would think that this is really a typo and it should be censorship, which would be more in line with any other government agency. C-E-N-S-U-R.
I'm not aware, I've looked at a good many charters, I'm not aware of any other county charters that have this. There may be. I haven't looked for that particular item. I think it's pretty unusual in local government. I understand that higher up on the hierarchy of government, they have this. I think we've seen in the last week at the federal level what a three-ring circus that can turn into.
Well, I think, Bob, it's the censorship. You're seeing that on the state level and the federal level. It's just part of what the law allows, and I think that's what the purpose of this is. In perspective, These 31 recommendations are just recommendations that have come to the council over the last few years, and this is not a mandate for the committee. These are just items that can be given to the committee for them to make those decisions.
Well, it would seem to me if it's going to be given to them on either of those grounds or both, that there should be some specification as to what it would address. I mean, is it just going to be, we didn't like what you did, or we didn't like what you said, and therefore we're going to smack you on the wrist? Or is there going to be some objective criteria for what you can be censured for? So you would, the person, the council member, or for that matter, I guess it could be the executive too, if you're going to censure the council, you might as well throw him in the mix.
Well, I think you make a very good point,
Yeah,
Bob. You make a
so-
very good point. Now, there is another item up above, I think, which tries to direct the concerns about any violations and what recourse we may have with the executive. So that is listed in here above. This is somewhat similar to the fact that I know in the past, and I think Joe and Bill could, and Larry, you could affirm this, that there were council members that created certain violations. I think the most egregious violation is a violation of a closed work session, where you know there was a closed work session, but you don't have any recourse. And there are several instances where it has occurred in the past, and there's really been no recourse, so I'm pretty sure that's what we're looking at here.
And when you mention closed work session, nobody's supposed to discuss it beyond that closed work session.
Right, but
And information has been leaked out in the past.
Right, and I'm sure, and there's certainly minutes that would reflect that throughout the past, whereas there were violations of closed session, but there's really been no recourse, Mr. Taylor. So that's really, I mean, you make a very good point, because it should be a little more, the clarification should be a little greater.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, you're dovetailing back into the censor, C-E-N-S-O-R.
SOR.
There is a question around the country on closed session meetings as to whether a member is actually precluded from discussing what was said in the closed session. What the Act says is that the meeting has to be held in closed session. It's silent on anything else. And there is a real issue there. There's a First Amendment issue because there's ample Supreme Court authority. One of the cases was actually mentioned on Saturday during the impeachment hearing, Bond versus Floyd. That is very clear that members of a legislative body have almost a super First Amendment right to speak about public matters. I think anything that you do along these lines is going to be kind of treading very narrowly on the First Amendment. If it has to do with something that somebody says or perhaps even their actions. So I just point that out. So anyway, in any event, if there's going to be anything done, I would think the council would want to say what it is that they think somebody should be censured for, so it's just not an open item. And that's, we can go over that later. I mean,
On that, Mr. Taylor and John, I guess my question, if you censor somebody, what's the ramifications? I mean, what are you doing other than just saying you've been censored? I mean, is there any punishment that's going to be aligned with that, or is it just a slap on the wrist and something to try to embarrass somebody with? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Joe. I think the committee could probably, if they want to take this on, they could probably look up to see exactly how it's handled, maybe with other counties, or how it's handled on the state level or federal level. I don't think it's, from what I've seen, from what they discuss on a national level, it's more of a, like us, it appears to be more of a token gesture. Sometimes they take committee appointments away from them.
Right.
Of course, we don't have committee appointments. So there could be a varying degree of, what you might or might not do. That may be a blessing for some people, but anyway, there are different rules to it, and I think that either we could review that or the committee would want to review that.
Right, sounds like it could be something as simple as a public slap on the wrist. Any more discussion on that?
well, getting into the things that I did have a chance to look into in some detail, and items that have been somewhat hot topics, or at least publicly discussed a bit. There was an item, it's number 2 on the list, qualifications, should Wycomico County teachers be allowed to serve on the county council? Currently, and I'm reading, county and state employees are prohibited from holding office. What I did on that one is I went back and looked at all of the county charters, all of their provisions, qualifications, and prohibitions for council members. And this would apply to every charter county. Every charter county has councils. They all don't have county execs, but they all have councils. And by and large, I think there's one exception. There's a pretty widespread list of prohibitions for council members who are serving on the council to serve in other government-related positions and employment. So we're not alone, certainly, in that regard. The only one I could find that seems to be absolutely wide open is Baltimore City, which is considered for this purpose as like a charter county, even though they have a mayor, they don't have an exec. And that's all I could find. So it would appear to me that we're pretty much in the mainstream as we are now. And that's I have that listed. I have all the different provisions from the counties. Tied in somewhat to this, I think there's another question, isn't there, on council? Which one is that? I don't know the age, but I do have the ages listed there. And I have the other qualifications, but there's one other. What is it? What's the other one? Yeah, it had to do with vacancies, I guess, and I've got that analyzed from the other counties too. And again, there's a variation across the board. Some counties have very, very detailed provisions. They involve a list of people from the state central committee if the person is a member of the party. A few of them require public hearings. Some of them are just at the opposite end. Again, referencing Baltimore City.
Mr. Taylor, which number are we talking about?
I guess this would be vacancies number 4.
Number 4.
And for example, Baltimore City, if there's a vacancy on the council there, the procedure is after public notice, the city council, by majority vote of its remaining members, shall elect a person to serve for the remainder of the unexpired term of the former incumbent. There's another county that's very similar to that. There are a couple of other counties that have, it's a little bit more involved. It involves getting a list from the state central committee and going from there. It seems to me that there's like a spectrum. There are jurisdictions that essentially want to have it done over, one and done quickly, and there are others where it gets prolonged to go through all these different hoops that are provided. We've seen, I think, just in the last couple years, sometimes jumping through those hoops itself can be very time-consuming and to some extent controversial. So I guess it's, where do you want to be? Do you want to be at one end, the other end, or in the spectrum? We're in the middle. We're kind of roughly in the middle right now. There is another aspect of this that's very interesting too, and that is the special election. Up until a few years ago, if a council position became vacant, it had to be filled for the entire term. You couldn't have a special election during the remainder of the term. That was changed. I think it was a constitutional amendment, state constitutional amendment. You can do that now. Some counties just provide that if the vacancy occurs during, say, the first 3 years of the 4-year term, you just go to a special election. Don't go through this process of getting a list from the central committee, having hearings.
When you say special election, is that the next presidential election, or?
It could be simultaneous, yes, but it doesn't have to be. You can just hold a special election. For example, 5 of the 7 seats on the council are district seats. The election, I would assume in that case, would just be a district election, wouldn't be countywide, because the district seats are filled by the district voters only. Now, at large, it would be, of course, a countywide election. So it seems to me that there might be some people who would view that to be the ideal way to do it. Yes, there's a cost to hold the election. That's true. But it could essentially be the quickest. I mean, you can have your election PDQ. And, you might want to consider that, because if the idea is that the electorate should have a say in who fills the vacant position, that covers that ground. I mean, that covers that ground 100%. Whereas the other methods don't. The only way in which it's handled by the voters of a district or at large is by having that special election or dovetailing it like we did this year with the presidential election. So there's a lot of things to look at, and that's why I think it helps to look at all of the counties and not just one county that happened to make a change and they tweaked it a little bit and now they're doing it this way.
Can I ask a question, well, not necessarily you, Mr. Taylor, but to the council? Because your comments are very educational, and but since we haven't appointed our commission yet, are we a little bit ahead of ourselves? I mean, because I would love for those 15 people that are appointed to be hearing the comments that Mr. Taylor is making. And, he's educating us, but we're not the ones making those decisions. The appointed commission will be. So, I mean, at this point, these are just, as Ms. Hurley said earlier, and Mr. Cannon, I think, said it, these are just a list of things that we've been keeping tab of over the last couple of years. And so, I don't want your research and your well-made comments to go, just go to waste and be unnoticed, because we don't have the commission yet. So are we like one meeting ahead of ourselves with the proposed charter discussion that we're going to pass on to the commission?
I think what we were doing was going through them and striking the ones that we really don't need to discuss or to pass on as a guideline.
But they could take up anything they want, so I don't even know if I'd want to strike any of them, even whether I agreed with them or not, just to give them the opportunity to consider them.
And I agree with you, but I think most of the committee members will be going there blindly and not knowing what to look at.
I'm still saying they get this, but we don't have a commission yet. So we're kind of just, like I say, Mr. Taylor's giving some good advice, but there's no one to give it to at the moment.
Well,
This is something that Mr. Taylor could share with the commission
Right.
when they're established.
Right.
Well, there is being minutes taken, so they'll be able to read whatever he says, correct?
Well, and there's another aspect to it. I mean, typically, the council, legislative body, will put on the table for the committee things that it is particularly interested in and having reviewed for the potential change. And on these items, for example, if you're happy with what we've got, then, don't put it on the list. Let them look at other things. Now, if they want to look at it, fine. But I mean, that's, in my experience, particularly in Salisbury and some other counties, as to how that's done. And that's why I've done it. Now, I'm not trying to give advice. I'm not trying to recommend that it be done one way or the other on these two items that I've mentioned. But I've suggested that look at the panoply, look at the broad spectrum of the other counties and see if there's anything in there that might appeal as another way, maybe not necessarily better way, but another way to do it. I've also looked at, just going a little further forward, same thing for the county executive. There was quite a bit of discussion and comment about that this past summer. I've got that spelled out, how all the different counties do it. And again, there's a range of how it is done. And that's another one of the items that I've prepared. I would suggest on all of these that you look at them and discuss them and not decide today, because can't go over all 31 of the items.
Right, and we're not going to.
A fourth one are qualifications and prohibitions for the county executive. which is another aspect that we discussed a lot this summer. And I would point out on that, there are two provisions that are not in charters that could bear on this. And there's a provision in the Maryland Constitution, Declaration of Rights, Article 35. No person may hold at the same time more than one office of profit created under the Constitution or laws of this state. There's also a common law doctrine of what they call incompatible positions, and that is that public officials can't hold a public office and then another position that's incompatible with that office, and that's spelled out in this. So there are a lot of things that have to be considered, I think, when you get into these areas, and that's why I've done this. I mean, these are the more complex ones. I haven't gotten them all, but I've got some of them. Another one that's on there in a couple different places has to do with property tax limitations. There are 5 counties in Maryland that either have a property tax revenue cap, like we do, or they have a rate cap. And as it's indicated here in the notes, and also in the thing that I've prepared, Montgomery County, this year, these are charter amendment items, shifted from a revenue cap to a rate limit cap. Talbot County made several changes. One of the things they did, Talbot County, incidentally, their revenue rate cap was essentially the boilerplate for ours. The folks in Talbot County came down and suggested it, and a group of folks petitioned and got it in our charter. So up until the November election, the two provisions were exactly the same, word for word. But they're no longer that way because Talbot County changed theirs. They took out the CPI aspect of the cap. In other words, ours now and theirs used to be that your tax revenue could go up by the lesser of CPI increase in the prior calendar year or 2%. And for the last 4 or 5 years, ours has been less than 2%. CPI hasn't gone up that much in the last 4 or 5 years. Yes, sometimes it is more than 2%, but oftentimes it's not. So they've taken that part out. Another thing that they did is because they need money for a new sheriff's office, sound familiar, and some other county improvements, they did an override of the remaining limit. In other words, the 2%, as you know, the tax revenue cap rate actually turns into a tax rate because you have to set the rate so you're within the cap. But they now allow an override for a period of 5 years on that rate up to a penny per $100 because they want to generate more revenue. Another thing they did that is more or less a housekeeping type amendment is they've provided that in doing your calculations as to what your tax base is, because you have to have a tax base to calculate a rate to get a revenue amount, that they use the State Department, what is it called, the constant yield tax rate data. We do that, they did it, but technically, if you go by the exact language of the charter, that's not how you do it. The reason we do it and the reason they did it is because you'd have to go through an endless amount of calculation to do it any other way. You'd spend it wouldn't be hours, it would be days doing the calculation. So what they've done is they've conformed their charter to what the practice is. And at least in my view, that of the 3 changes they made in Talbot County, that one is a no-brainer. I mean, we ought to do that too, so we conform our charter to what we're doing. So that's the story on the property tax.
Mr. Holloway, did you have a comment? No. Oh, okay, I saw your hand on the mic. I thought you were getting ready to say something.
And just to add, I know on there, when you were talking about the rationale for getting rid of the CPI, it was also that because they didn't consider the CPI to be the appropriate measure
That's true.
of inflation, because that's a measure of goods and services.
Yeah.
consumer goods and services. It's not a measure of governmental services, such as healthcare costs going up and things of that nature.
That's a good point. Of course, I think the bottom line, at least in Talbot County, was they need more revenue also. That's why they did the override. But anyway, that's kind of a rough view. I mean, there are other items on there that I think would behoove us to do, and I'm talking about broadly now, council, committee, for that matter, the public, to have some see at how it's done elsewhere. An example, something I didn't get to, but I think it's certainly worth looking at, is the removal of the county executive for health reasons. My recollection, I've got the charter here, I can pull it out. It has to be 6 months, essentially, of inactivity. I have noticed, I haven't put it all down in one place yet, but I have noticed that some counties do not have that 60-day, 6-month period. It's much shorter, or in some cases, none at all. If the county executive becomes incapacitated, he can be removed essentially immediately. There has, have to go through some procedural steps, have a meeting and things like that, but I mean, we'd be talking days or weeks, not 6 months. And to me, I mean, just commonsensical tells me that if you can do without a county executive because he's inactive or incapacitated for 6 months, it's almost like saying you don't need a county executive if you're not going to be there for 6 months. So that's an item. That's number 12.
Right.
Number 13, forfeiture of office by the county executive. Should this provision be expanded? I don't know what the expansion it has in mind. I don't really know about that. I mean, there are a couple of counties that do have a removal provision for other than health reasons. It doesn't seem to be the majority view of the counties, but there are some. Just to let you know, you can't recall a public official in Maryland, county official, elected official I'm talking about. There's a constitutional prohibition for that. But removal is different from recall. A recall is a vote of the public. Removal is something that can be done, apparently, because it is done in some counties, in the sense they have it in the charter. So that would be another example. I can go through there. There's others. There's some that I think are more or less straight policy. For example, number 17, should this section provide for an in-house county attorney? I am not aware of any charter that provides for that. I do know that of the charter counties, with one or two exceptions, including ours, there's no in-house county attorney. There has been here in the past, but there isn't now. So, I mean, I know the practice generally is to have an in-house county attorney, but there's no requirement to do that. Should the county attorney review all contracts of the legislative branch of the government? Again, this is more or less a straight policy matter. It would seem to me that if there were to be some specific requirement, that there probably should be some floor under which it doesn't need to be done, because there are lots of contracts that are essentially peanut amount contracts, and they're on standard business forms that you can't vary anyway if you want to deal with that particular vendor. But when you get above a certain amount, that's just, I'm just throwing out thoughts. But the main thought is, do you want to provide that or not? That's if you all feel that the committee should look at it, then I think it should be on the list. It goes to the committee. If not, don't put it on the list. Update charter sections that refer to Article 25A of the local government article. I think that's a misprint. It's Article 25A is an old part of the code that's been repealed, and it's now been replaced by the local government article. Our charter still has a lot of citations to Article 25A, different sections, and I think there could be just a housekeeping charter amendment, just to clean house on things like that. Another thing that I think I've heard mentioned is the context about he, she. Right now, most of our provisions, I think, talk about him and he as a pronoun and not he, she. And if they want to do that, then that could be revised too. That's another.
Is that something the council can do without going on the ballot?
No, if you're going to change anything in the charter, it has to be done by referendum. And there are. I mean, I've looked back in the last 5 or 6 cycles. It's a 2-year process. Every 2 years, charter counties come in and make changes. We did not do it in 2020, but a lot of other counties did. We did it in 2018. We did it in 2016. And I think we did it in 14 and 12. And in some of cases, you see just a general housekeeping type amendment. It doesn't spell out in the ballot question each and every item. It just says to make changes to conform to the current version of the state code, or in other words, some just generic type description of what's being done.
Bob,
Yeah.
doesn't our charter currently state that any reference to he is non-gender? And
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know, but I mean, I've heard people mention that instead of saying he, just to be nice, let's say, or, you know, the current view of what's nice, it shouldn't just say he, it should say he or she.
Right. I just thought I thought that in our charter, maybe the beginning of the charter, it refers to the fact that any mention of he actually is non-gender, and it reflects he, she, or whatever it might be.
It might. It
Yeah.
might, I don't know. But I mean, I'm looking at what has been brought up as we think this should be changed.
Okay.
I mean, I don't care myself, believe me.
Yeah.
But that would be something that could be put in the general housekeeping type of, there are probably some other changes of that kind, not having to do with gender, not having to do with Article 25, but just generally that probably need to be changed, modernized to some extent. And that could also be part of that batch referendum charter amendment. You know, just going down the list, you can find lots of things like that. Just skipping down to 21, clarification of benefits programs, it refers to a section that says, does this mean changes to benefit programs must be approved by the council? I haven't looked at that this week, but I did look at it last summer, and I believe it's pretty clear in our charter that the change on benefit programs is a council matter. And that's the way it had always been done in the past, as far as I can tell. I've looked back about 5 or 6 years into our changes, and they were always done by the council, with the exception of this most recent one, where we changed from the 457B plan. There were changes, some pretty significant changes made there that were not made by the council. In fact, the council didn't know about them until after they were made. But that's just, you know, a view on that. 22, the question came up if the word compensation, including pension payments, can a former county employee serve as a council member if he or she, or there we are again, is receiving pension payments? I should have mentioned when I was talking about some of the prohibitions for council members that several counties provide that even though a current county employee could not be on the council, that if they're retired and they're only receiving pension benefits, that does not disqualify them. So that there are provisions, and you'll see them in the material I've presented or provided, that could be done to clarify on that. So that's an item. 23.
Mr. Taylor, you don't have to go through every single one of
Okay.
these.
Well, I mean, sooner or later, I think we should. I mean, if you want me to take it up next time, that's fine too.
We can discuss it another time, but one thing we can talk about, since we're not going to be able to discuss the process in closed session, we could talk about how we're going to select these members. There's 44 applicants, so if somebody wants to start talking about that.
Mr. President?
We already did that. That was our work session at the last
I
meeting.
think somebody had some changes that they wanted to discuss.
I want to talk about it. I got more than one call, really, after our
Well,
last
first of all, can we do that? Ms. Hurley, can we do that? I mean, we talked about this at the last open work session. We had a whole open work session on this, how we're going to select. We've already told the public.
It was discussed in a work session, but there was not a formal vote, so council.
It was just a
It was just a work session.
Right, but this here says to discuss provisions for charter review. We've advertised to the public. We haven't advertised to the public. We're going to now start over talking about.
You
how
want
we're
to
gonna
put it,
select
you
these
want to put it
members.
on the agenda for the next meeting that we talk about it?
No, we've already done it.
Yeah, but we didn't take a formal vote, and we can.
We went
still
around the
talk about it.
room, we took a majority vote and said that's how we're going to do
It
it.
was a consensus vote, Bill.
Right.
Okay, it wasn't a formal vote.
We've done that.
That's what you're going to do in a work session, is a consensus vote. You know, that is what you
Understand
do,
that,
Joe.
you know, understand
And
that.
that's what was taken.
Well, there's been some information come forward since we took our consensus vote that I think that we ought to discuss. And if you don't want to discuss it now, that's fine. I'll just ask the council president to put it on the agenda for next time.
Well, we're going into closed session to make our choices. How are you going to put it on the agenda the next time if we're going into
I didn't
closed
think
session?
we were going to vote on our choices today.
Well, we're
So
going into-
I've also had citizens reach out to me with different questions, and I would like to discuss them just to get clarification on our
Well,
parameters. for
You want me to talk about it, Bill, or you want to try to
Well,
shut it down?
Well, I'm still waiting for the answer. Can we even do that?
It sounds like to me you need another work session.
Schedule another work session?
I still had a question on Mr. Taylor on the topic of this work session, and Josh, I think you were ahead of me. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Hastings.
Well, just, first of all, I want to just getting back to what we were going over with, I do think that the more that I hear all these comments and all these pieces, I do think this is something that the committee itself should lead. I kind of feel like we're, getting ahead of them, and I don't know how we get to that point where we help, because there may be a whole lot of items that the individuals who would be on this committee, they may have their own items that they think are important. These are the ones that we've just collected, or the ones we've heard or people have told us over the years. They're not any particular priority. So as much as possible, it'd be nice if they could lead on that, and then they could come back to us or ask us for clarification as to what they think is important. The other question I had was just on process. Again, I didn't know if, and so I'm clear, and so the public is clear, the recommendations that this group puts together, does that come back to us to then approve to go to the ballot, or does this come on as one question that goes on to the ballot, or so process-wise, I don't know if that'd be helpful to.
Ms. Hurley, how does that process happen after the committee makes their recommendations?
So once the committee makes their recommendations, council will review the recommendations. They, in the past, have had public hearings on what they want to put on the ballot. They'll approve it by resolution. It then goes to the county attorney to certify. That normally happens in August. Once that process is done, it'll go on the November ballot.
Could I amplify that just a little bit? The committee's recommendations, like Laura said, will come back to the council. The council can do essentially anything it wants. It can take a recommendation and put it on the ballot. That's that certification she's mentioning. The county attorney essentially writes a ballot question, and they send that to the election board, and that's how it gets on the ballot.
Could this theoretically
But-
be 30 questions or one question?
Well, some of them probably could be combined. For example, there were a couple on the council. They could probably be combined as to one item. All those housekeeping items I mentioned, that could certainly be a package. But the council, when this report comes back, can do anything it wants, including putting on referendum items of its own that the committee doesn't recommend at all or even recommends against. Many charter committees, there'll be a minority report There'll be a majority report and there'll be a minority report, and sometimes more than one. So essentially, it's, as far as the council is concerned, going forward on the ballot, the council has a free hand. It's not in any way tied by what the committee does. Now, yes, they make recommendations, and I'm not suggesting they shouldn't be considered, but that doesn't mean that they are automatically followed. There was, I think, a misunderstanding in the news article about a month ago that the suggestion was that anything the committee recommends goes on the ballot. That's incorrect.
Ms. Hurley or Mr. Taylor, in reference to Mr. Hason's comment or question, would they all come back in a list of amendments? Like it could be 20 amendments they're recommending for the ballot to go on referendum?
That would be the normal practice. Yeah, I can send you some reports from some other counties.
Should give us a
They'll
presentation.
usually just put a table.
I know what we've done in the past years ourselves with amendments,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering about the Charter Review Committee itself.
One thing we have to keep in mind is the amount of these we put on the ballot, because you reach a point where it gets very confusing. So, you have to, try to limit it to a certain amount, so.
And it can be expensive too, Mr. Cannon.
Yeah, I think the decision that we're going to have to make as a council, the important decision is how far we go with this. I've always said that the charter as a whole needs to be completely redone, and when it goes to the ballot, possibly the general public will be voting on a new charter. It's not totally incomprehensible. It's what they did when they first created the executive legislative form of government. We may need to look at that again. The greatest, I think, disservice to the committee, which I experienced the last time I was on the Charter Review Committee, was the fact that we turned in numerous what we thought were very important charter amendments that needed to be considered. But similar to what Joe suggested, the council at the time only chose maybe 3 of those recommendations, specifically because they did not want to inundate the public with too many questions on a ballot. Very valid. So I think the most important question we have is how are we going to take these 32 changes, and there will be more that this committee will recommend. How are we going to get that to the public on a ballot? It may have to be, you can only combine so many, Bob, and I understand what you're saying. The other thing which is just as important is that I think it may be important, depending on what this council wants to do, whether or not we want them to recommend fiscal policy changes, whether we want them to include in these recommendations changes to the revenue cap, or anything in there that might state that in order to do a capital improvement in Wycomico County, it has to go to referendum first and no longer be a decision of the executive legislative branch of government. So there are certain lines, I think, that we need to delineate as far as how far they go. And a reminder again, because everyone's saying this should be apolitical, which, there should be no political involvement at all. Well, the charter, as it is today, as has been stated in this room, clearly states it has to come back to the council for a final vote. So these type of guidelines are important for this group to understand as to how far we want them to go. We wouldn't want them to spend 3 days on a revenue cap if we have no inclination whatsoever to make that change as a council.
That's right.
So, Mr. Cannon, when you were on this committee previously, did you have was there someone there guiding you with, okay, we have 30 recommendations, but you're only going to be able to put so many forward that are going to go on the ballot?
No, not at the time. No, not at the time. It just, we just did it, in good faith. We sent to the council the changes that we thought were important. And, of course, we recognized it when they cut it down to 3. We thought it wasn't the best thing to do, but we recognized the fact of how overwhelming it could be with the general population. But again, we have to make that decision whether we're going to change the charter in its entirety or whether we're going to have to selectively throw 42 amendments out there.
Right.
Well, I guess one quick comment I'd make to that is if it's, and it's looking that way where there's this possibility you could be talking about 30 or more like type changes. When you start, once you get into those many changes, it really starts taking the form of should it be a revised charter? Now I don't know and Mr. Taylor, you might have to help me there, yeah, I don't know if that's something that we're able to, can that go as a, like, to be voted on as one, as a revised charter, or do they have to be in these bits and pieces? But before you answer that, one other quick point I want to make. It is the Charter Review Commission, so I don't think we can dictate to them, like, you can't look at this, a certain item, whatever that item might be. I just don't think we can or should tell them, well, don't look at this. I mean, they can look at, but given this many changes, it's starting to sound like it's almost a revised charter as opposed to
Well,
bits and pieces.
maybe we should change from a review committee to a revised committee, because this thing's taking on a whole new set of legs here. If you're talking about, like John said, completely rewriting the charter. Now, John said that that's what they did when we went to the executive form of government. I don't think we did exactly that, John. We did form an executive form of government, but we didn't change a lot of the other things in the charter, as we've seen over the past 16 years or whatever. Things keep popping up that are in the charter that doesn't fit with the executive form of government.
That's
so,
right.
we've had that problem, but we've charged. This has been charged as a charter review committee, and I think if it's put out there as we're going to change the charter completely, as far as even having a new charter, that the folks that's volunteered for this are probably going to be in for quite more of a job than they thought they were looking for. Not that they don't want to do it, don't get me wrong, but it seems to be going to be a lot more time than what we were looking for, and I think we need to take our time as a council to decide what we are going to send them and how we're going to form all this. So.
Let me answer Mr. McCain's question and maybe give you some general background information too. Yeah, we could do a revised charter. It can be done. It's obviously time intensive. The story on the charter, if you will, from day one, and this is a little different than Mr. Cannon. The charter was actually enacted back in the 60s. That's when we started. We didn't have the executive form until about 20 years ago, or 15 now, I think it is. And when they did the revision to change over to the county exec, it was, you're right, they did a complete charter, but essentially it was tweaking to the county executive form. There wasn't much change other than that. I happen to have a copy of the 60s charter, maybe the only one in existence, so if you want it, it's going to cost you. I got it online, actually, but
Did you write it?
I tried to.
I bet you did.
And many of our provisions go back right to that 60s charter with very little change. Now, there have been changes, it's true, but a lot of it, I would guess probably more than 50% in textual volume goes back with almost no change at all. That's one reason, I think, why we have some of these matters that seem like they're a little antiquated now. But if it's going to be done on a broad basis, an all-inclusive basis, it's going to take a lot of work to do it right. I mean, yeah, we could still do it and tweak it like they did 15 or so years ago.
It's not just going to take the work of this charter review committee. It's going to take a lot of legal background work to be done also. I mean, the charter review committee can send a lot of information in or send a lot of suggestions in to be done, but if there's background work done, sometimes you're going to find out that can't be done because it's not legal to do it that way.
Well, and there's another aspect of this too, in the sense that, it seems like we have a lot of time, but we don't, to do a full review of it. But you don't have to wait 10 years to do a full review of it. If you decide in 2 years' time or 3 years' time that you want to do a full review and put it on for referendum, other than in this 10-year cycle that we use for the Charter Review Committee, you can do that. So it doesn't mean it's impossible to do it now or you have to wait another 10 years. Just point that out.
Yep, Mr. Hastings.
I'll just say that I think what's clear is that we do have a lot of items. I think anyone who's been paying attention for the last 4 years, especially, we have a lot of things that we probably need to think about. And maybe part of the reason why there's so many items is because we didn't, in the past, we didn't take on maybe what we this body and should have. And likely, it's only we're not even 20 years into switching over from executive legislative branch form. So I do think we need to have a more substantial process, and whomever we choose to be a part of this certainly needs to be very committed to a long haul.
I agree with it.
Just one last thing. Bob, you made a lot of great input today. I'd love for you to, if you could email that information to the council so that we can really look at it and review it.
I think you got it, didn't you, Laura?
I did get an email from Mr. Taylor last night on
Okay,
some
great.
of the information. I don't think I got all of it, but some of it I have.
Yeah, there should be 4 different items, and there is a 5th that I finished up this morning, and I'll send that to you. You can just send it as a package.
And that would all be for consideration.
Let me point out on the information that
Mr.
I'm
Taylor,
going to send. Some of the formatting is my fault. It's hard to pull this stuff out and get it into the format I was using. I probably should have used a little bit different format with the Word documents I was putting together. But it is legible, and I'm sorry it's a little ragged here and there, but I think you'll be able to get through it without too many headaches.
Okay. Mr. Holloway, did you have another comment on the process?
We can't discuss it, we'll have to have another
Another work session on that?
You can amend the agenda to add a work session today that requires a supermajority vote, or you can add a work session to the next agenda.
You want to do it the next meeting?
Well, I can ask to amend the agenda today to discuss it if get a supermajority vote.
What's the supermajority vote, 5? Bill, do you want to amend it?
We've already discussed it. I'm
Yeah.
opposed to making any
Ernie?
changes.
John?
I haven't heard the amendment.
It was to
Discuss the process.
rediscuss the process of how we're choosing the members.
I thought we were going to form of a motion to second and a supermajority vote.
I didn't hear you.
I thought we were putting this in form of a motion and a second with a supermajority vote. You're
Just ask
asking-
for a motion for it. I'll make the motion.
What, in a work session? Okay. Do you have a motion?
I'll make a motion, I need a second.
Do you have a second?
Could you state the motion, Joe, just for clarification for everybody?
I'd like to make a motion that we add a work session today to discuss the process of appointing the members of the Charter Review Committee.
Do we have a second?
I'll make a second.
You have a second. Okay, now we need a supermajority vote. Mr. McCain was no. Ernie, I didn't see what you said. Mr. Cannon?
I don't think so.
Mr. Hastings?
I don't think so. That's fine.
Okay, we don't have a majority.
Okay.
All right. Any more discussion on that? Ms. Hurley, you had a request.
We do. We have a request to bump up the discussion on the letter of support for the Salisbury Christian Shelter. If we can hold that work session next.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Can the bishop come up front, please? Ms. Ackley, you want to lead this discussion?
Bishop Dickerson and I have been working on a bond bill to support the renovation of a thrift store that's attached to the Salisbury Christian Shelter. And we are looking for a letter of support to move that bond bill forward. Bond bills do not have a bill number, and they're done later in session, so that's why we're bringing it to you now. I'm going to let the bishop describe his program and what this bond bill will be used for.
Okay, Bishop?
Thank you, Council. Thank you for, in advance, your support of the Christian Shelter. Thank you for your invitation and inviting me here today. We're looking to redo our thrift store. It's probably, it needs some substantial repairs. We're looking to repair it so we'll be able to use it for our guests as a training session They'll be able to sort clothes and hang clothes, so we want to get it up to par. And we're able to distribute some food and clothing to the community free of charge. And so we just want to get the thrift store up to par, up to code. We've been in the community for 40 years. We've been serving the community 40 years. We don't receive any government funds. So we depend solely on the support of the public, and we've been pretty successful in doing so. Our aim is to transition lives, and we have different types of programs in place. We have a mental health program. We have a financial literacy program. We have smoking cessation classes. So basically what we're trying to do is transform the lives of individuals. We want to do more than just provide 3 hots and a cot. We want individuals to be productive citizens, and we have been successful in doing so. Just to name a few, we just placed a gentleman that he got his disability. We aided him in getting this disability, and we just acquired him property. And now he'll be moving in his own apartment. So we're grateful about our success rate that we have, and it's just going to get better.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments on this letter of support for the Christian Center?
I would say that Bishop's doing great work, and I certainly would be in favor of the letter.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
Happy to support it.
Okay. Do we have a consensus? Okay. We have a consensus. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Miss Sandy, do you want to read number 1?
On the work sessions?
Yes.
So the next work session is a lease agreement with the Wycomico Equestrian Club, and we have Mr. Steve Miller available to discuss that.
Mr. Miller.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Morning.
Members of the council. We're here to talk about the request to extend the lease agreement at the Wycomico Equestrian Center with the Wycomico Equestrian Club. The county's had a lease agreement in place for the last 5 years. Started in 2016 and just recently expired. And our hope and intention is to extend that lease for an additional 5-year term that would expire at the end of 2025. A couple just very quick comments. Our relationship with the club has traditionally been very good. The club has been excellent stewards of the facility, and our relationship with them has enhanced indirectly the quality of life, our mission in our department, by providing equestrian events for locals, but also by drawing visitors in from out of town when they hold a handful of events that will draw people from out of the area. So we're very positive, or we feel very positive about that relationship, and would like to see that continue. We have made some minor wording adjustments to the agreement, and then we also agreed to a minor increase in the rate that the county would charge over 5 years. It'd be a gradual increase to help the county recoup some of the costs that have increased over the years. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Stanley Morris from the club is also here. He's been a big part of this over the many years, so I'd be happy to answer any questions if any members have them.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Miller? Mr. Cannon.
I'd just like to state that it has been a great organization to work with. It's been a very good complementary group to have in the winter place. So, yeah, without question, I think we should move forward with it. Thank you.
All right. Any more questions or comments? Okay, this is going to require a public hearing. The public hearing can be held on March 16th at 10 a.m. All right, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Sandy, you want to read the next one?
All right, the next work session is to discuss an increase to the 911 fee, and we have Mr. David Shipley, Director of Emergency Services, and Mrs. Pam Oland, Director of Finance.
Good morning.
Good morning. If you'd introduce yourselves.
Pam Olin, Director of Finance.
David Shipley, Director of Emergency Services.
So I wanted to provide some additional information in regards to the 911 fee that has been previously discussed.
So this has come before us before, and there wasn't a consensus, but now there's new information.
There's additional clarification.
Okay.
That reminds me of something that we just said a few minutes ago.
Additional clarification. So the 911 fee is allowed to be adjusted by each county and to help offset the costs associated with running 911. The state had passed a law previously that allowed it to go to 75 cents, and that was mandated that it had to go to 75 cents. The new law, which takes effect allows it to take effect on July 1st, that allows us to recover our costs of that department. That department is part of the general fund in total. So property taxes, income taxes help pay the fees or the costs of that department right now. If we were able to adjust the 911 fee to something greater than 75 cents, we would be able to reduce the burden on other revenue streams of the county related to the 911 center. Again, we pulled some additional local jurisdictions. Some are doing it, some are not. We have one opportunity every fiscal year to make a change. That opportunity comes before we have to actually create our budget. It always has to be announced to the state by April 1st so that all the carriers can be notified by July 1st. So if we do not take action on this now, the next time we can bring this forward to council is next year at this time. The 911 fee also, basically increasing this fee for the people who have phone lines in the county is equivalent to 1 cent on the property tax. So if we increase this to the fee that we're recommending, which is to $1.30, that's that additional revenue, that $600,000 is about 1 cent on our taxes. So we would be able to use that 1 cent for other items within the county. Board of Education, all the other things that are Board of Education, Kerwin just got overridden. We are going to be required to fund Kerwin. We're going to be you guys are meeting on FOP negotiations this afternoon. All of those things in the midst of a pandemic are happening. So here is an opportunity for the users of phones to pay the fee. If the council is not interested in going all the way up to $1.30, we could consider going up to $1, increasing it to 25 cents per line. And that would then at least raise an additional $282,000. And again, that is offset off of the regular revenue or off of the other revenues to cover these costs.
And that would have been a question that I was going to ask. Are there any other fee options that you would want the council to consider if they didn't want to go the full amount? Mr. Holloway.
We can go anywhere between the 75 cents, which we're mandated to do, which is currently set, up to the $1.30. I have brought two examples, $1 and $1.30. We can go anywhere within that range, and any increase from the 75 cents helps offset costs for that department.
Mr. Holloway.
Well, I know we voted on this. We took a consensus vote and voted no on it. 2 meetings ago?
Yeah.
I have a question. With today's technology as it is there any chance that if you're looking for a revenue stream, that you would look at the telemarketers' calls that come in to everybody multiple times a day, and maybe we can put a charge on those? I know technology would allow it because the state's getting ready to do a internet tax. So they are, that is available. It looks to me like that would be a good revenue stream to go for, and maybe it would cut back on some of those telemarketers calling people multiple times a day.
I don't believe we personally have the technology to be able to determine those calls per person, per line,
I think we probably do. Somewhere in our IT department, I think they should be able to figure that out.
But Ms. Olin, but at the end of the day, I mean, we're simply trying to recoup the cost.
Correct.
I mean, we're not charging citizens of our county something over and above what just simply the cost is.
It is the cost.
So-
911 requirements have continued to grow as to what our employees are required to do. We do get funding from the state to upgrade our capital infrastructure, but this is literally covering the employees that we need to have 24/7 answering those phones up at the facility.
Does 100% of this 75 cents you're collecting now go directly to 911 services? And will, if it's increased, will 100% of that go directly to 911 services?
We do not have this set up as an enterprise fund, but again, you have the revenue in the general fund and it offsets the expense within the general fund. It allows revenue for something, the remaining revenue to be used for something else.
So we really don't know how much of this 75 cents is going to.
We can't say, we can say that we're spending 100% of this on this because it's all within the same fund. That would be like, we would have to literally separate every department into their own separate funds if we really wanted to allocate all, and that would become a very complicated accounting system.
So we don't know that 100% of this money is actually going to the 911 system operation.
100% of the money that would be coming in would equal 100% of the costs associated with 911.
But again, it's not all going to that one operation, right? It's going to the general, it's going to emergency services as a broad department, correct?
It's going to the general fund, and the expenses equal the revenues.
Okay.
So theoretically, it would go to emergency services, but it's just an amount to offset the cost, but it would be going to the general fund to be used at
But it, again,
your discretion.
No, again, the only reason we're increasing this is because our costs are our costs are higher than what we collect in revenue. If our costs were not higher, we would not be allowed by legislation to increase this cost.
Okay. And you said earlier that you need time to let all the providers know. Do you know all the providers?
No, we have to let the state know. We
You
have to let the state know by April 1st that we have enacted legislation to allow for this to happen. If we do not let them know by April 1st, the next opportunity that we have is next year at this time.
So how do you single out all the providers? Because you keep seeing all of these advertisements
That's the
for,
state's responsibility.
and a lot of them are merging. What about the voice over internet? Are you allowed to charge for those phone calls?
You have a phone, you get the fee.
Okay,
And so it's not just mobile phones that have this. It is phone systems have the current 75 cents. It is based on the number of phone lines you have. So if your family has 3 phone lines, 1 landline and 2 cell phones, you're going to get currently 75 cents per month times 3, and then times 12. So it is based on the number of phone lines you have. The government office building has multiple lines. We have a lot more phone numbers than we actually have lines, but we will be charged by the number of lines we have in the building.
Okay. Any more questions? All right, continue.
I don't have anything else. The question is whether or not council has any appetite for a increase to the fee anywhere from basically a penny up to in total $1.30.
All right, that is the question. What is the appetite?
Well, I mean, for me, just personally, I mean, we need to be covering our cost. I think some of the concern from what I'm hearing from some of the council members is just going from the 75 cents to the $1.30, all at one time. But, it's a cost we're simply trying to recoup. If it helps any, I mean, Ms. Olin, could we go, is it possible for it to be like we go to $1 next year, then $1.30? So that we step it as opposed to just leapfrogging there all at once?
Yes, we could create the legislation so that the legislation would say we were increasing it to $1 from 75 cents.
So that recommendation be a 25-cent increase?
But then the following year to the $1.30, or do you have to come back to us again the
We would
next
have
year?
to come back to it. What I would recommend is we come back to you again next year, because then we would reevaluate where our costs are, and we could say, okay, at that point, maybe it's $1.35. And maybe we don't want to go all the way up to $1.35 next year, but we would come back to you again next year. I wouldn't set in legislation any change other than this first year, so that then we could come back and recalculate the costs again for next year.
Yeah, I'd propose that if that gets more consensus on the council, if that helps alleviate some of the concerns.
Well, I guess,
Mr. Holloway?
if we're interested in going to the $1.30, are we interested in cutting the tax rate a penny?
But then you just lost the,
Well, you're getting services to pay for services.
but now you're
is
not
what
covering
saying,
it.
And, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I'm not interested in raising any fees right now, so.
And I may have missed this, I apologize, but what is our bottom line for covering our costs?
$1.30 would covers our costs for this. So again, anything less than $1.30 does not cover the costs of the department, but it does increase the offset available to us if we can do anywhere in that range.
Mr. Hastings, did you have a comment? Mr. Cannon? All right, the suggestion made was a 25-cent increase per phone line, which sounds a little more palatable, and then they would come back next year. How does the council feel on this? Has to be a consensus.
I feel like we need to at least cover our cost. And if we just take it to $1, I think that's reasonable.
I agree with Ms. Ackley.
I agree. Mr. Cannon?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that Ms. Olin has taken the time to actually come up with more exact figures, because that was my concern initially. I know when it was presented before, we'd asked questions about the funding, and I was under the impression that this is going to simply increase the budget for the department, but was unaware of the fact that we were absorbing losses. Didn't realize that. I appreciate you coming back to help explain that, and you've clarified it with more exact figures, which I appreciate that as well, so I'm okay with $1.
Mr. Hastings?
Yes, I'll say the same thing Mr. Cannon said. I certainly heard enough folks that reached out and were immediately scared that they saw more fees coming up and they don't know the full picture. Of course, this goes to a very important fund. There's nothing more important if you suddenly are having a heart attack and you need help. 911's pretty important. Folks that make sure that we have enough staffing and all that. So I'm happy to not see it go all the way up to the full amount, but $1 is fine.
Yeah, I'm like Mr. Holloway. We have a pandemic, but also Ms. Ackley says we've got to cover costs, and I agree with that too. But I hate seeing any increases, but we have a majority consensus.
So we'll be back, Laura, next time?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Sandy, can you read the next one?
Okay, next on the agenda, we have a letter of support for the holder of a Class A beer, wine, and liquor license to sell beer, wine, and liquor on Sundays from 6 a.m. to midnight. And Ms. Christine Travis, the administrative assistant for the Wycomico County Board of License Commissioners, is here.
Okay, thank you. If you would, introduce yourself for the record, and you pull your mic down and get a little bit closer to that mic.
My name is Christine Travis, and I'm the Administrative Assistant to the Wicomico County Board of License Commissioners.
Okay, and Mr. Basoda?
John Pasoda, Acting County Executive.
And Mr. Basoda asked for this to be on the agenda as a work session.
Yes, I was approached by the Chamber of Commerce with a suggestion, a recommendation that the three liquor dispensaries in question be allowed to sell liquor on Sundays, which at this time they're not able to do. So my office reached out to Christine, and she can fill out the rest of the details.
It appears that for a very long time, our liquor stores, which is only comprised of 3, are not allowed to sell the distilled spirits on Sunday. And doing plenty of research, the entire Eastern Shore is allowed to sell distilled spirits on Sunday to go, and many counties on the Western Shore, including the state of Delaware. And I believe, with some precision guesswork, this probably stems from the blue laws many, many moons ago, when a lot of businesses had to be closed on Sunday. And the only way they can open up on Sunday is a change in legislation, making them a 6-day license from Monday to Saturday to a 7-day license Monday through Sunday.
Okay, any questions or comments? Mr. Hastings?
Not sure how I missed that. So currently our liquor stores are closed on Sunday?
No.
Or what? What's
The
deal?
privately
Or pardon me.
owned one, the
Yeah.
privately owned ones are closed. The dispensary is a completely separate entity with their own board, and they are allowed to set their own hours of operation. And about 2 or 3 years ago, they chose to open up on Sundays. They have their own entity, their own board, and just use the county name as a dispensary system.
Okay. And do the times change on this? In the proposed change?
No, it'll be 6 a.m. to midnight.
Cool.
Mr. Holloway?
Now, I thought she would, when they said, are they open, our liquor stores, Wycomico County's liquor stores are currently open on Sundays.
Yes,
They
sir.
have been for the past 3 or 4 years. So-
Yes, sir.
So this has to do with the private liquor stores that are operating, so, okay.
Any more questions
I
or
was
comments?
addressing Mr. Hastings' question there.
Yes.
So one of the questions that
Exactly.
one question that I have is that I've heard back from our Lower Shore delegation is when there have been matters forwarded to them for enabling legislation, it was not discussed at the delegation meeting, and so they were hesitant to put them forward. And at this time, we haven't discussed this with them.
That's correct. So, and I'm finding out that there are, that's not a unique case. We're finding that has happened quite a few times in this legislative session, that I've been on many calls for legislative priorities, and there are things been put forward that I was unaware of. However, this was brought forward a couple weeks ago by the Chamber of Commerce in regards to these, I believe there's three licenses. That's a concern that they had. It's my understanding if we can get a letter of support to Delegate Anderton's office, then we can move forward with this proposed legislation.
So, but my understanding when the Lower Shore delegation explained why they couldn't put certain legislation forward is it wasn't discussed in that meeting, our Lower Shore delegation meeting. So I just don't want this to go to Annapolis and them say, well, no, we can't do it because it wasn't discussed in that meeting.
In our office's communications with Delegate Anderson's office, if we can get a letter of support forwarded to them,
Okay.
then this legislation can move forward.
Okay.
And it's a simple, it appears to be a simple, straightforward, dealing specifically and only with Sunday sales.
Okay.
That seems to be the only, seems to be, depending on what it is, whatever gets approved up there, so.
Any more questions?
I'd like to see it move
Mr.
forward.
Cannon?
I'd like to see it move forward,
You'd like to see it move forward?
get into the new century.
All right, now we're looking for a consensus. Mr. Cannon, Mr. Hastings?
I'm good with it, yeah. So I'm good with it.
You're good with it. Ms. Ackley? Mr. McCain?
I'm not going to get in the way of it. I'm not necessarily a fan of it, but I'm not going to get in the way of it.
I agree. Mr. Davis?
Yeah.
And Mr. Holloway?
I'm fine.
Okay, you have a consensus. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Sandy, can you read the next one?
Okay, next we have council discussion on the capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2022 through 2026.
Okay. And who do we have here for that?
This is council discussion.
Okay, I didn't know if we had anybody here to discuss with.
Us.
Just us, okay. Ms. Ackley, did you have a question?
I just had a few things that I noticed. I wanted to point out that Barron Creek Road, it's not on fiscal year 2023, and it's been taken off the MSF project for 22. I guess I just am questioning how that dropped off or why the priority changed.
Does anybody know?
Should we get the executive back in?
I didn't hear you.
Should we get the executive back in?
Yeah, we need somebody to answer these questions soon.
I did request for all department heads to be available because it is open discussion just in case any department came up, so I can check to see if they're in his
So are we
office.
back to that again, where you ask them to come and they don't show up?
Perhaps the county, the acting county executive.
Can we check with John and see if he can at least sit in? He may not know the answers, but at least he can get the answers for us. I think that was a good question. He said it was pulled off.
Or Miss Olin might know those answers the best.
Yeah, she probably should sit through it too. I wish the executive was sit in the audience the whole time.
It was in there. She's right. It was in there. It was in there.
Yeah.
It was in there.
I don't think there's an intention to ever do it, that's what I'm saying.
Well, Bob didn't want to do
It's
it.
in there, but it just keeps getting spun around,
Yeah.
Right.
unfortunately.
Welcome back. Miss Ackley had a question.
This was on Barron Creek Road. I noticed it's not in the CIP for fiscal year 2023, and it's not on the MSF projects for 2022. So I'm just wondering if it's been taken off, if it's not a feasible project.
It's in the budget, it's on Public Works, it's line R8 on page 7 for 2023. It is not in the budget for 2022 at this point in time. It is listed for $1.4 million in 2023.
Is it still a MS4 project, do you know?
I can't answer that part of the question, but MS4 projects, we have, we allocate that $500,000, and if there are specific projects that end up being more costly than $500,000, they may get spelled out on their own. So if this one classifies as MS4, it would be an additional funding beyond the $500,000 that we're asking for MS4, because there are some projects that cost more than just the annual $500,000 allotment for MS4.
I guess, why does it keep getting pushed back? I mean, this has been going on for probably 10 years now, 8 years. How long has it been, sir? You're in?
Like that in 16, it was put in the budget in 19.
Okay, and so, I mean, it
It
keeps
is-
getting bumped back. I mean,
It's a costly project, and the consensus has been through discussions that there are other projects that are higher priority at this point in time than that road.
I guess that depends on where you live. I'm sorry, I'm just.
I get that, but there are other projects that, again, as we have talked about, limited funding sources in a lot of different ways and a lot of different times that I've been sitting here. In our discussions with the department, the decision was made at this point in time that the funding was not available for '22.
So I'm looking at it for fiscal year '23 at 1.4 million.
That is currently where it is placed.
And so you're saying if something higher priority comes along, it would bump that again?
There is that possibility.
What is the estimate cost of this project to date? Because I know it's
We have
continued to
paid-
grow.
We have paid about $850,000 currently for that project, and looking at another $1.4 million.
Okay.
Another 1.4 million. All right. So that road is still closed? I haven't been down there in a while.
Can't go through there without a bridge.
Yes, the road is
Last
still
time I
closed.
went down there was probably in 18 or 19, and it was closed then.
I have a quick question. We were having our meetings regarding, at some point, we're going to be embarking on county public sewer in some kind of capacity, which obviously is going to cost us money. And I know, and I certainly get it. The challenge you all have at this moment is we don't have those, we don't know what it's going to, quote, cost us, and we haven't established a plan yet. But this is our CIP, our 5-year capital improvement plan, so it's taking us through, 2026. So, I'm certainly anticipating we're going to be initiating that in some kind of capacity in these next 5 years. So, I mean, and I know it's a challenge of, how do we pick a number, when we don't have a
And,
plan yet.
That's one of the things that we have not done with this CIP. Until we have numbers, we could list a lot of projects that are on the horizon, but yet don't have any idea of cost. So putting them on here and putting a number on here and then coming back to you next year when we have a better number and you saying, well, the number has gone up by whatever.
I understand. I just realized, how tight, as we've mentioned time and time again, how tight this is.
The one advantage, but again, it's all going to be dependent on location, and the one advantage to any of that, there would be fees charged that would help offset those costs.
That's correct.
So that piece of it would play into, it would probably be set up as some sort of enterprise fund. At the beginning, may have to have some sort of infusion from the general government, but the hope is that any of these that we would set up then would become self-sustaining, and thus any debt that we would have to incur would be able to be covered by the population that it would be using the service. Again, like the landfill maintains 100% of their own costs, and when we borrow, for them, they pay their debt service.
I think Mr. McCain brought up a good point. It's not on here, so it's not on our radar screen. But if it was a enterprise fund, it'd be something to work with.
Just for clarification, you're speaking about water and sewer implementation as far as implementing the plan or the study that comes out from GMB? Is that
Correct.
Okay.
Right, that initial, and kind of like Ms. Olin said, I mean, obviously, initially, obviously, once we get it established, and there's the user fees that are being paid for the usage, but out of that gates, we're obviously going to have some, probably pretty significant capital costs to implement, whatever that plan comes up with.
And that is difficult to put in the 5-year plan because we just don't know what those
Oh, yeah.
costs are.
Yeah, and I get that.
As well as the components, it could be several different avenues that we use to fund that project. So.
And there is, I can make a note for myself for next year as something to consider. Is that do we include a list that has no dollars? Here are projects that may be on the horizon for the county. We don't yet know what they're going to cost to the county, but hey, we want you to be aware of them, that if they pop onto this schedule in a year or so, it's an idea. It's something that let me think about, and let me think about if there's a way to show it. But that might be an idea for a future.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So you would set up a category as, say, water and sewer system, something like that, set a category up and have some initiated funds to go toward it at the beginning. I mean, we're spending money on it now because we got GMB hard, right?
Right, and that's
So
being
shouldn't there be
paid-
a category now set up that's?
Because if we make the determination tomorrow that we're not going down this path, it's just a general government cost, a general fund cost. But if at the point in time we are ready to set up a system where there are users of that system, then that would be when we would implement creating its own fund.
Well, I realize you're saying it's a general government cost, but should not we know how much is actually being spent on this project already? And by having a category set up?
And we do, so where we don't have a segregated water sewer project, a county water sewer project fund, since we don't have that, we have those costs associated thus far in, I believe, roads? It's in a segregated.
So we're paying this out of roads money now?
We're paying it out of capital project funds.
For engineering costs,
Yeah.
right? A general category that we have throughout all departments. When we do engineering, we have engineering for each department. So
Department, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Which department is this coming out of?
Let me look it up, please. Let me get back to you on that information.
Okay.
So that I can, I believe it's coming out of the capital project fund with identifier that it's a general government project. But let me look that up, please.
The point being that it's a general category. We haven't got a specific fund for a county water sewer project.
Right, I understand that. Yeah. I guess that's what I was saying. Should not we have that so we know where we're at as far as the spending goes when we do enter into whatever kind of agreement that, or decide on what we're going to do, we'll know what we've spent so far.
I believe it's easily tracked because it's in a capital project and it's segregated, but let me check that, please.
Thank you.
Are there any other projects on the horizon that don't have a figure that you referred to? That you can think of?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, it'd be nice to know.
Doesn't mean that there aren't any. I just can't come up with one at this moment. But let me look at that concept for future CIPs.
I'm sure some of us 7 could find some.
Any more questions or comments on the capital improvement? Ms. Ackley?
I had a few questions on the school construction with West Side Intermediate. In 2020, it was a $281,000 state project. And then in 2021, it was a $281,000 county project. And now their 2022, it's $1.7 million county project, and the state's deferred it.
So the state has, my understanding for a lot of these renovation-type projects have said, those aren't really projects we're going to fund at this point.
They backed out of it.
So pretty much, those funds that you were talking about, we have engineering costs and that kind of stuff. So there were some early costs that we have paid. But part of the reason why this one came on is because the state has basically said that, I think the term the Board of Education uses, systematic upgrades. So basically, when they're upgrading HVACs or roofs or systems within the buildings that are upgrades, right now the state is not looking at participating in the funding of those.
That's a pretty big jump, though, from 281,000 to 1.7 million.
That's because at first the state was
That's the state.
funding it.
Okay, so that,
And then being they backed out, we had to fund the full amount.
got it, okay. And then with the special initiative they have, I saw there were quite a few HVAC systems in there, and they definitely need to be replaced, but with the COVID relief package, would that be covering any of the air quality HVAC systems?
I don't have an answer to the question.
Okay. Thanks. Ernie?
I don't think so, because I think that's required through the county, that we're responsible for the upgrades of these systems.
Any more questions or comments? on the CIP? Mr. Cannon?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple. Pam, I don't think we asked you before, but I don't think there was any mention, unless I missed it, of retiring debt. Normally in the introduction, there's, when you talk about our general debt obligation, et cetera, there's been a mention of a retiring debt, but I don't think there was anything in here suggesting how much debt we're retiring this year.
I don't have that now. We are paying off debt this year, and
Yeah.
we will be paying off debt. 22 is actually one of the years. Part of the reason we have the available debt limit that we do is 22 is a big year of actually payments, and that's when we had talked about when I was presenting the financial forecast, the 22 and I believe 23 has a pretty good payoff, but then some of our debt kind of levels off, and so we don't have a lot of payoff in 24, 25 timeframe.
Yeah, and I didn't expect it now, but if you could get that for us.
It will be as part of the budget information that you receive.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is, and John and Pam, this is for both of you, is possibly moving forward with a change in sort of procedures with the CIP. I would love to see a breakdown of projects that get canceled. If you go into a CIP, such as, we were talking about Barron Creek, I mean, that was like the last time that was in was 2018, if I'm not mistaken, was in a CIP. But when we look at these CIPs, we don't know what's happened. We don't necessarily know what happened to the West Side Collector Road. We don't know what happened to Barron Creek. So maybe to change procedures from here on out, when a new CIP is presented each year, that there be a section there that explains what projects were canceled, maybe what projects were moved forward. I don't want to get into such a minutiae of detail, but just to give us an idea.
And maybe expand on the concept that I was stating earlier, where we give a list of projects that might be on the horizon that don't have a dollar amount yet, projects that at this point in time we have kind of taken off the horizon.
Yeah, exactly. Because when we say, okay, we're going to approve 400,000 this year and $1.5 million the next year, and then the next year, kind of like we don't know where it is or what happened. And we don't know why sometimes. So that would be great. The only other thing that I had was that. What was it? Hang on a second. I'm trying to read my writing here. Well, not a real big deal, but I did notice that in the discussion on the stadium, and I'll pull it up here real quick so I can tell you. It's not no bearing on approval or disapproval of it, but I noticed that there was a phrase in the Purdue Stadium. So many times it said that they are seeking professional recommendations about how to cost-effectively maintain the boilers, et cetera, for as long as possible. So I thought that was somewhat ominous, but they say that that statement is in all three: the boiler, the fire pump, and the fire suppression, for as long as possible.
Well, as you may or may not remember, in the concession agreement, once those mechanical systems have reached their useful life, any repairs up until the useful life of those mechanical systems are a requirement of shorebirds to make those payments and make those repairs. And that schedule's on the back of the concession agreement. Once it's past its useful life, if there are any repairs needed to the system, they become the cost of the county. So some of these items are pretty big ticket items. The fire suppression system is one we have kind of piecemealed and taken some of the more necessary areas and gotten them done first. But the whole system we weren't able to do at one time. So if a break happens, if something goes down in an HVAC system, what we're trying to do is we're trying to put maintenance costs in so that we can maintain those to postpone the big capital expenditure of replacing that system. So that is why that statement's in there, is that we're trying to be cost effective, but we don't want to if it gets to a point that the number to repair it is so significant, that will be the point in time we would look at trying to replace it.
Mm-hmm. You address our questions as if you've been sitting in that seat for 10 years. I want you to know that.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that it, Mr. Cannon?
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments?
I got one question.
Mr. Holloway.
One question. Qualifying for a capital improvement project, what's the timeline that would be, I guess, used for it to qualify, but either a capital improvement project or just a general fund project? As far as the sustainability, how long this project, I'm looking at the carpet for the hurdle building replacement, and I'm thinking, is the carpet going to last as long as the loan does if we borrow money, I guess?
Well, and most of those, it's not a set in stone, but most of the items that are under 500,000 we do as pay-go. And most of the items that are under $1 million we do as pay-go. So we don't intend to try to borrow those funds for something like carpet and that kind of thing. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but pretty much projects that are either $100,000 or multi-year projects make the CIP. Again, a rule of thumb that we were trying to go by, if it was under $1 million, can we afford to do it as a pay-go project? And now you may see, like on Rec and Parks, there's some numbers on here that are under $100,000. We wanted to bring those to your attention because they are grant projects where there is a matching requirement, but typically that match is about 10%. And so you may see some projects on this CIP list that are under 100,000, but they're primarily grant-based projects that require a small funding amount from the county.
Is there a designation when you do this capital improvement plan of what will be pay-go and what will not? So when we look at it, we can make that designation?
Again, that rule of thumb that I gave you, I liked the simplicity of how this came about, but I can understand not knowing how, like on page 5, that $1.5 million number comes up as what's pay-go and what's bond.
Mm-hmm. Could you put like PG behind the numbers in the plan when you do it?
I will figure out a way to signify in the future.
So for easy reference, so we would.
Yeah, the colors confused me last year, but let me think about that one for future, as well as to how to show how the $22 million is added up and how the 1.5 is, so that you guys have a little bit more information without me having to explode the Excel spreadsheet so that you see everything adding up.
So you don't get interrogated as much, right? You do great, thank you.
And what about the ones that are under 100,000? Like you said, grants. Is there any way to signify next to it that
that would be how I would think about it. Some way to possibly show how the ones above add to the funding source below, because having lived the life of the rec parks and tourism, I can tell you on, page 8, the Cedar Hill Marina Park restoration at $250,000, that's 100% grant funded that we're looking for. So it's down in that $754,000 grant, but you can't see that from this. So let me think about a way to show that in future CIPs.
Right, when you look at it, it looks like it's coming out of the general fund.
Right.
So, all right, any more questions? No more questions. Okay. With that said, thank you. And I guess it's time for lunch. Need a motion or recess?
So moved.